Okay, you just got your first sponge filter, and even though it's supposed to be stupid easy, you have no idea how to put this thing together. No worries, I'm going to teach you in a few easy steps. Hi, this is A Gamer's Wife, here with practical fish care tips so that busy aquarists like you can spend more time enjoying your aquariums. And since I'm about to start my next breeding project and needed a new sponge filter for my fry tank, here's a quick tutorial on how to set one up and a few bonus tips to help you out. For materials, you're going to need a sponge filter, 3/16 inch regular aquarium airline tubing, an air pump rated for the size of your aquarium check valve, and AIRSTONE. The brands I use are listed in the description. First, you're going to take apart the sponge filter. You should have a lift tube, the foam sponge, and then the weighted base at the bottom. Inside the sponge is a strainer and the bullseye top of the strainer. Bonus tip number 1. I always recommend adding an AIRSTONE to the inside of the sponge filter. It makes the bubbles a lot smaller and a lot quieter, so it doesn't sound like you're making a witch's brew all the time. The strainer for the large high-door sponge I have in my main tank is completely hollow, so it was easy to add the AIRSTONE. But the strainer for the small aquatop sponge filter has spokes in the middle, so I just cut them off. Bonus tip number 2. There's actually 2 ways to connect the AIRSTONE. Method number 1 is to cut off a little airline tubing to connect the AIRSTONE to the bottom of the bullseye. Make sure the tubing is long enough so that the AIRSTONE will rest at the bottom of the strainer. Then take the rest of the airline tubing and put one end through the lift tube and attach it to the top of the bullseye. Method number 2 is what I use when the strainer is really short and can barely fit the AIRSTONE. I completely bypass the nipple in the center of the bullseye by pulling one end of the airline tubing through the lift tube, no need to cut the tubing at all. You thread it through the spokes of the bullseye and then connect it directly to the AIRSTONE. It performs exactly the same, and visually you can't tell a difference. Now you can reassemble the rest of the sponge filter. Insert the strainer inside of the sponge and attach the weighted base to the bottom of the strainer. Then connect the lift tube onto the top of the bullseye. At this point, the sponge filter should be still attached to a long roll of airline tubing. Place the sponge filter into the aquarium and squeeze it several times to get most of the bubbles out. It should sink immediately, but if it doesn't, it will eventually get waterlogged enough that it stays down. Finally, we're going to install the air pump. Put the air pump where you intend it to stay, and then cut the airline tubing so that it's long enough to connect the sponge filter to the pump. If the air pump is below the sponge, you have one extra step of adding a check valve to prevent water from siphoning out of the tank if the power goes out. You're going to cut the airline tubing a few inches outside of the aquarium so that it's closer to the sponge filter side, and then connect this check valve in between. The banded side of the check valve goes toward the pump. You'll know if you installed it backwards because no air will reach the sponge filter. The last step is to plug in the pump. Make sure there's a drip loop in the power cable such that the cable dips down lower than the plug so that no water can reach the outlet. Also, I like to place the pump on a small hand towel to absorb some of the vibrations and lessen the noise level. And voila! Here's my new sponge filter sitting on top of my old sponge filter, getting seeded with beneficial bacteria for my new fry tank. Next week, I'll be talking about tips and tricks for surviving your first fish club auction, but in the meanwhile, you can check out my recommended playlist on freshwater aquarium how-tos and other videos in the right-hand column. Also, hit that subscribe button and follow me on Instagram for daily updates. Don't forget to enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you guys next time.